Good morning. Welcome to our KTI Unlocking Knowledge Transfer webinar this morning. This series has been designed to really shine a spotlight on all aspects of knowledge transfer from the Irish research base and to really encourage collaboration between Irish industry and Irish universities and institutes of technology. So this morning we're focusing on the subject of building research consortia, and we're delighted to have three experts with us this morning. So we have Daniela Angione from Inner Pharma Technology Limited based in Dublin. We also have Gerard Land from Enterprise Ireland and the Disruptive Technologies Innovation Fund. And we have Duncan Casey from Maynooth Works at Maynooth University. So the format of the webinar this morning is going to be a panel discussion with our experts hosted by Vincent Wall. And we'd encourage you to submit any questions that you may have for our panel at any time. We have quite a large attendance this morning, so get your questions in early, get your questions in often, and make sure that they're heard by our audience, by our panel members. And also just to let you know that the webinar is being recorded, and the recording and recordings of previous webinars will be available on the KTI website. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Vincent.
Thanks indeed, Siobhan, and good morning to the panel, and looking forward to this session. And as Siobhan said there, please get your questions into us and we'll try and put as many as possible to the panel, either seamlessly through the session or we might keep some towards the end. So please do get them into us. Gerard from Enterprise Ireland, you have a specific fund which you're involved in terms of research consortia, but perhaps the best way to start is what is the definition of research consortia? Firstly, what are the various elements involved? Do they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes?
So I'm going to answer your last question first. Yes, consortia do come in all different shapes and sizes. And it depends on what the funders are looking for. So, you know, you will find DTIF will have one set of criteria. Other funders like the European Union will have a different kind of criteria. And it also depends on the specific scheme that is funding a piece of research. So first and foremost, it's important to understand what the funder is looking for in each of those consortia and how they want to have them established. From our perspective at DTIF,
and in your case, in the Disruptive Technologies Innovation Fund, you are the funder.
Technically, the government is a funder. I mean, it's coming out of the National Development Plan, but it is administered by Enterprise Ireland. When we look at consortia, we look at, you know, is there synergy and connectedness between the entities involved? That is a key element of it. Is there an interdependency? Is this something that the parties could go away and do independently with their own resources, or do they really need to depend on each other to actually achieve the outcomes of the project? Are there long-term benefits, mutual benefits across the consortium? Is there agreed sharing of costs and results? And most importantly, and we see this not infrequently, some consortia tend to be a collection of separate, unconnected entities, in essence, not doing one project, but doing 3 or 4 different projects. So that comes through in applications that we see from time to time, but that's certainly not what we're aiming for at a consortium level.
And by and large, Gerard, and based on your experience in Enterprise Ireland generally, and not just with the specific fund you're involved with now, by and large, do these research consortia, by and large, involve an academic party of some sort, an industry partner, whether that's a multinational or an SME, and then the funder, whether public or private?
Depends entirely on the fund. Certainly in DTIF, there's a lot of evidence around collaborative projects with RPOs involved. That's not a requirement of the fund, though. We also have purely corporate entities involved with equally good consortia aimed at achieving a project output.
Danielle, coming to you, will you outline to us firstly what Inner Pharma does, and from Inner Pharma's point of view, what are the benefits of putting consortia together and getting involved in them?
Yes, so Inner Pharma is is an SME, so it's a for profit, a company, and Inner Pharma now we has different divisions, and there is the technology. So there is an R&D, right, division and development. So we do research, but also education. But the reason why a company like Inner Pharma would join a consortium and would actually lead a consortium, because it has expertise in leading and joining, not only higher education institution would lead a consortium, even SME or large enterprise would do. It's really comes down to the ambition of growing, the ambition of providing some of the expertise that we have developed in the company, and but also enlarge, like broaden our network of people, like, let's say, friends, but also collaborators. So you increase the visibility of what you do in the company, but also you also learn something new from a consortium, from a project that you built and you develop during a research.
And in joining or indeed leading a consortium as part of a group of parties, is there always, and I suppose this may be a stupid question, but I'll ask it anyway, is there always a specific commercial or technological or innovation objective at the end of it?
Well, yes. So again, depending on the different the variety, there's a lot of different scheme you can apply for. But in general, what you need to put yourself as an end goal and as an objective has to be some sort of either a pilot line, so a technological outcome has to come out of the consortium and the research that you are developing. Yes, and the more, depending on the kind of scheme you have applied to, if it's a research and innovation action, for example, or an innovation action, so depending on the TRL that you need to achieve at the end of the project, you need to be more or less ready for having a real commercial kind of technological commercial output at the end of the project. Yes.
Duncan Casey, Director of Maynooth Works, coming to you. Maynooth Works is a business innovation centre aligned to Maynooth University. I know you're not that long here. I think you're here about 18 months, but you've been fulfilling the same kinds of roles in the UK beforehand. What's the rationale, or what are the benefits for academic institutions, researchers, or even startup companies within an academic environment getting involved in research groups?
Okay, so Maynooth Works, just to start off, Maynooth Works covers the whole spectrum. So we do all of the knowledge transfer side, so taking ideas and expertise out of the university, but also bringing companies in with problems and mixing it up in the middle. And we have, as you say, our business innovation centre that deals in kind of business startup and incubation and mentoring and support. So we cover the whole range. So we get to see the whole story. From a particularly an SME perspective, and as an early stage company, or a team of maybe 3 or 4 or maybe 10 people, most of whom are probably technically minded. So there's always going to be gaps in your expertise. There's always things that you don't know how to do. You quite possibly have a technology you really believe in, but don't understand entirely how it fits in, how you productize that into a certain market sector, for example. And so being able to access external expertise in a hurry is always really going to be valuable. The other thing, or the flip side of that coin, is when you identified a really important challenge, you know there is an unmet need, you know there is something over here that the world needs, and you're over here somewhere, and what you need to do is develop your technology through the iteration, through the stages, towards fitting exactly that hole. And being able to get hold of the local world leading expert in that sector is really, really valuable. Whether that sector is renewable energy or earthworm biology, the chances are you don't have one on your company books, but we do.
So we've kind of, I think, dealt pretty well with what research consortia are, their objectives, their nature. From a funding perspective, Jared, what are you looking for in terms of the components and the stakeholders that would enter such a research consortium? We're not hearing you, Jared.
Sorry about that. We look at it purely from an economic development angle. I mean, we're making investments around DTIF for economic gain around that consortium. We want to see consortia that have a level of resilience, that are all focused on going and achieving something that is truly disruptive and innovative in the market, and generating economic outputs within a 3 to 5 year period. A lot of the evidence on the ground, and this is the reason we use consortia, would suggest that a consortium is much, much greater than the sum of its parts. It is something that achieves more valuable outputs, greater understanding, etc., around the problem they are trying to solve. And that's the reason that we go down the consortium route for DTIF.
And from your funding perspective, how important is it that the various parties that come together in a consortium really understand each other and know each other, spend time getting to know each other's areas of expertise, their resilience, as you say it, their alignment in terms of the ultimate objective, and even the chemistry between them?
It's not something that we assess as part of an evaluation process. I mean, there are certainly some elements of the consortium, but the depth at which we go into that, you know, we don't go to establish, you know, how long these people have been working together. Is this a valid consortium or not? You know, it's very much a high level matter for us. Where we see difficulties in terms of consortia is that over the course of a 3-year project, there are all manner of environmental changes. And again, that's where this resilience of the consortium comes in to handle those changes as the project progresses. And a well-formed consortia where there's good synergy between the members will be able to weather those in the course of most projects.
Daniela, I know Inner Pharma has worked on collaborative research projects across many different countries and accessed many different types of funders. How important from your perspective is that getting to know you phase, that dating phase, I suppose we might call it, before a consortium formally comes together?
Vincent, I think is extremely important. I just went through this, and we are, you know, in the process of submitting 2 proposals and leading them. So it's a very delicate and difficult process, because there's always well, you get to know each other. So sometimes, of course, part of the consortium, you know, you try to build a consortium building on existing relationships. So people that you know, but you can't rely on those, because as we said, you know, the idea that you want to submit for you know, to the competition basically has to be ambitious, has to be disruptive, has to carry that level of you know, breakthrough in some cases, in some instances. And to do that, you need then to build in your consortium, also involve the right stakeholders in the consortium to make sure that you can achieve that, to make sure you can exploit that at the end of the proposal. So that process, it's very delicate, because everybody that comes into a consortium, in the back of their head, they're going to think, what's in it for me? What's the benefit? So we have to make sure, you have to make sure that everybody is sharing a benefit by participating, but it's also giving in their expertise, and it's clear the role that they're having. And sometimes defining those roles, it's very, very complicated. It's not very clear, especially, for example, when you are building a consortium for like a medium size consortium where you're asking for something like, I don't know, 12 millions. In that case, you have a participation of 15 to 20 different members in the consortium. So managing those numbers is not easy, and also making sure. I think that the tricky part is communicating the ambition and the enthusiasm, because it's actually a creative process, building a consortium and submitting a proposal, and that has to be perceived by all the different members. And probably only in that case you really are successful, when you kind of share the same level of enthusiasm that this proposal is going to really bring something new.
And without being prescriptive, because every situation is different, obviously. And as you said, on many occasions, some of the different parties will already know each other and have got to know each other's way of working. But without being prescriptive, how long should that get to know you session take, or how long can it take before the consortium actually formally comes together?
So, as a general kind of timeline, if they say from 12 to 9 months before the deadline, you should start engaging with people. And there are, again, different ways of doing that, different platforms and different approaches. And that's the start. And as you go on, I mean, usually you start with small numbers, that you get to know each other. But by the end, by the time you get 3 months to the submission, then it really gets heated, in terms of that you really, because you get to define the fine details of the proposal. And when you get to do that, you understand what is actually missing in terms of, partners that, it's not, the main, is not part of the core of the consortium, but it is needed for the developing the proposal.
Duncan, you have already given us a perspective on what the benefits of entering a research consortium for a smaller an SME or a campus company that wouldn't have the resources otherwise. From an academic point of view, or from a business innovation center linked to an academic institution, what are the inputs that you put in? Because there are obviously third-party funding sources. Some private industry will bring cash in some instances. What does your party bring? Is it just expertise, or is there a financial cost for your side as well?
So from the university perspective, there's a combination of expertise and facilities and the kind of clustering effect of being able to access people from lots of different disciplines and very, very close proximity. Ideas bounce around, and that's where the magic often happens. But a big chunk of our job as a technology transfer, as a knowledge transfer center, as a business innovation center, is building communication between different partners. Because academics and startup executives and multinational executives all speak different languages. They have very different timelines, they have very different priorities, and they might be using the same words, but I absolutely guarantee to you they mean different things. So a big chunk of our role in ManuthWorks is to identify what everyone really needs out of this, what everybody's specific wins are going to be, and how they map onto one another. How those timelines can be matched in a way that delivers a short to medium term commercial win for an SME partner that's probably only got 6 months of runway, but delivers a supply chain solution to a multinational who's thinking on a 3-year basis, and potentially to an academic team that's thinking on maybe a kind of PhD timeline, 3, 4, 5 years, and making sure that each of those milestones, each of those wins overlaps. Because if you have, particularly with SMEs involved, with these short timelines, short runways, a delay of a couple of months here and there that an academic won't necessarily notice can be catastrophic for your relationship.
We've talked about the reasons for these, broadly the way they're structured, the benefits over time if it all works. But it does sound like a complex ecosystem in terms of the various variables. How important, Duncan, then is the actual formal agreement in terms of how the consortium ultimately works and achieving its objectives?
The agreement should be a description of a thing you've already agreed, right? If you've lined up it's all about shared risk and shared reward. So everybody has a strategic imperative in being involved. If you've got people who are in because they think it's a good idea or because they saw the fund and thought, oh, we'll apply to that, what are we going to do? Then you're setting yourself up for disaster. So there must be a shared risk and a shared reward to the whole program, or you're probably going to be in trouble. The agreement itself should be a formality, although rarely is if corporate lawyers are involved. But you should be essentially writing down the thing you agreed in your last meeting in legalese. Right? From a university perspective, from a business innovation center perspective, we're typically using national scale agreed contracts and templates anyway, which makes it largely a case of finessing details for specific situations. So in that regard, it's straightforward and everyone's got a pretty good idea of what they're getting from the outset. But like I said, if you're still arguing the toss when it comes to contractual stage, you're probably in trouble already.
Is that your experience as well as a funder, Jared, in terms of the importance of the agreement, that by and large it all has to be agreed in principle before, I presume, some sort of a legal document, a contract is formed?
Yeah, I think all funders will have agreements that they like to have the consortium sign. And it is important because it formalizes, as Duncan has already said, what has already been agreed. It's important to have it written down. Whenever we look at consortia, and we haven't actually touched on the matter of how big should a consortia be. We see consortia between 4 or 5 kind of entities. It seems to be nicely sized in a lot of instances. We've seen some consortia that are much, much larger, and they come with a whole series of additional management problems because you are dealing with multiple agenda that aren't easy to get aligned. The important aspects, I think, in terms of that size of consortia is that there is that connectedness that I originally referred to, that they all have their own separate spaces, that they are all playing in the same value chain, but actually operating in different parts of that value chain to generate a result, to put it in a business context.
That said, that every part of the consortium needs some space. Do the best consortia, depending on the numbers involved, obviously, involve some sort of an executive committee to coordinate from the center and represent all stakeholders?
Most consortia will have some kind of a governance structure in place. That tends to be representative of the consortium at large. If you get to a situation where you've got a very large number of members, then you might decide to restrict that consortium to be, a smaller grouping that will act in the best interests of the consortium at large. But there is always a governance process put in place. You might call it project management if it's a much smaller kind of entity, but it tends to be more governance the bigger the projects get.
Is that your experience, Daniela? And you referenced earlier that you in Inner Pharma have been involved in consortia of various sizes and numbers of members. Is that your experience, that at one level each stakeholder needs space to work on their particular area, but at another level there needs to be some sort of coordination, I assume?
That needs to be absolutely right. There needs to be a coordination. There needs to be a lead, and that's probably the role that is attributed to the company or university who is leading these efforts. But also when you write a proposal, and especially for European proposals, projects, there's always needs to be defined the management. So there usually is a work package attributed to the management of the project that should cover all those aspects. But then this is only a draft of what then is detailed in the consortium, in the grant agreement, where there are more, details about how about the governance basically of the consortium. That is extremely important. There's always needs, but I think it's up to the coordinator how to deal with those issues that usually come. I mean, I see that there is a question in the chat about something related to this topic. How there's Anne asking about how you protect yourself.
Yeah, well, just as you pick up on that, Daniel, why don't I read it out, because I suppose it is an important question. So we have a questioner coming in. How can an SME protect itself within a consortium? This person's experience is that she worked with large international company and built up a team of 6 universities with relevant expertise to solve a major EU problem. So a consortium of at least 7 or 8 parties there. But she says, after 3 months of challenges, I could never have been a lead partner, but the international company engaged with another partner who decided that the project was strong, but didn't need my contribution. She says she was kicked out of her own consortium. So how can, I suppose, perhaps some of the smaller entities to a consortium protect themselves? Is that down to the original contract or the coordinator, or what?
Now, it's not clear when that has happened, meaning, before submitting the proposal, when the proposal has started already. I think this was before the submission, my understanding, but it is an issue. I've seen this happening. And unfortunately, only when the coordinator and the leader of the effort, it's has to be clear, all the roles, they are there. And sometimes these things happen. There's no way of really protecting yourself. You have to take into account, you have to build this slowly, step by step, building a relationship with the members of the consortium you want to work with, but also the leading effort. So that's the tricky part. The coordinator, whoever is leading the proposal, has to make sure who is doing what and define roles and make sure that it's the glue that puts everybody together. But at the same time, still it's clear that is the leader of the effort.
I'll put that question to you in just a moment as well, Duncan, because you must have a view on this in terms of, I suppose, perhaps the smaller parties coming into a consortium and how they represent themselves and protect themselves. But just on the issue of a coordinator, do consortia sometimes bring in some sort of a third party who's not a formal member of the consortium as a coordinator? Does that sometimes work? Daniela, no?
So it depends on the role of the third party. Yeah, I mean, sometimes there are third parties involved in the consortium, depending of if you need a specific expertise that you can't find. Sometimes, if you intend a third party like advisory board, yes, there's also part of the consortium, so they are not direct beneficiary of the funding of the proposal, but they still are there. Following the development of the proposal, giving some sort of feedback at a high level, feedback, validating your idea. So that's also their role in the proposal. Usually there's a combination of, for example, of large enterprise or people from academia that are coming in as advisors to the proposal. But again, has to be really clear. And sometimes I find is also helpful to start sort of drafting some sort of agreement even during building the consortium, so it's clear who is doing what, to define the roles.
Duncan, to that question, which is obviously an issue out there, how do SMEs or smaller groups of researchers coming from an academic background protect themselves in what can be complex research groups, consortium groups involving sometimes big commercial players?
So, I mean, I think probably the starting point is that each consortium should have as fewer members as you can manage. The more moving parts you have, the more hangers-on and the less aligned partners are, the more trouble you're in. So, I mean, from an SME perspective, the kind of ideal consortium is an SME with a technology that needs development, a multinational company that's going to be their lead buyer or their distributor or whatever, their champion is going to fill a supply chain issue for them, and some kind of research organization to help them take it from the early technology readiness level, like a TRL3 or something maybe, through to about a TRL7, where the big company starts to get interested. And if you can build a consortium like that, it will work and work and work. The tension with the question is that, like I said, you want a minimum number of partners, and you want to make sure that you have absolutely key partners at every stage, that everybody is entirely aligned and has the best possible fit for the needs of that consortium. Now, this kind of, I mean, the whole dating analogy gets a bit stretched when there's 15 partners involved. That's a bit specialist, but it's a moving jigsaw, right? The edges aren't fixed. The requirements of it will ebb and flow as different partners bring different expertise. And the first 10 people you talk to are probably not the 10 people who wind up in your consortium. And that can be good for the consortium, although it can be very bruising for those involved. If you are, as an SME or as a researcher, but particularly as an SME, the key is to have the strategic, the absolutely irreplaceable element. If you have the secret sauce, the magic ingredient that makes the whole thing tick, that means that at the very start of the chain, then you are irreplaceable, and it's going to work
effectively.
Yeah, but if you've built a structure in which you're a service provider at stage 3 or 4 or 5, there are probably competitors in your marketplace who can do it at least as well as you can, and it's very, very difficult to avoid that. And
just on that point, so the ideal scenario you paint there for an SME getting involved in a consortium would be that they bring something special, some special sauce, some indispensable element. How then do they, or how does the consortium structure protect whatever IP they bring in, or whatever unfolding IP develops, you know, without pointing fingers at people, that a multinational just doesn't pick that IP and leave the consortium and use it to their own advantage?
It's probably not worth it. It depends a little bit on your business strategy as that SME, but that can be your exit. If your medium to long-term strategy is to develop this technology to the point where another major social network or software company or technology company cannot live without it, or is worried about you as a competitor, they will simply buy it. Thank you very much. Go and live on a beach for a couple of years. That's not a bad outcome, right? There's always horror stories. There's always companies that will simply pick it up and say, sue us. But in the main, it's very bad publicity. It's very poor politics. You don't tend to get a second chance to do that. And it's cheaper and quicker and cleaner and better reputationally simply to write a large check and everyone goes away happy. So that's not a bad thing necessarily.
Is that your experience as well, Daniela, that by and large, you know, sometimes things will go wrong. These are human enterprises in the end, but that by and large, they do work to everybody's benefit, and that the self-interest of each party in the consortium ultimately keeps things together and serves the objective?
I think so, yeah. I think that's also my point of view, my experience. Again, you have always to define the rules and, you know, the whatever is linked to IP during the agreement. But generally speaking, things can go wrong. But generally speaking, there is in the interest of everybody, of all the players, to play by the rules, and you know, if there is a good outcome coming from a proposal, usually the end user, which is usually the large enterprise, has a preferential, you know, licensing agreement and buys the technology, and that's a great outcome for everybody. Otherwise, I mean, these kind of environments, right, when you build consortium and apply for funding, they're relatively small. So if you build your reputation, you know, as a person that is not very trustworthy, then, you know, that's the only time you can do probably something like that. So I agree with Duncan's point of view. Yes.
From your experience, Daniela, what, you know, 1 or 2 key do's and don'ts to people out there who might be thinking of looking at engaging with a research consortium? What would a key do and a key don't be?
I think don't do it. Just don't go and join a consortium only because you think it's an easy way to get funding and get money. And don't do it because your friends are asking you to join a consortium unless there is a real need and a crucial critical need and benefit to join a consortium. Those are, I think, the don'ts. So don't do it. The do, take your time. So start early the process. Try to build relationship with people. Even just aim for. I mean, sometimes I just reach out to people. So if you think that if you have in your head the ideal research consortium in terms of the members of the consortium, and you think there is a big player there that you don't know and you want to involve, take your time, start early, but reach out to these people, because most of the time you are successful. You can engage with them, you can involve them if you think that your idea, and have a great idea first of all. So have a great idea that you think is going to really change the game. And once you have that, then communicating and just building, be out there, go to matching events. There's a lot of brokerage events, matchmaking events that are organized at a national level, at a European level, where you can meet new people that you've never met before, even during COVID times. Virtually meeting. I know there's a limiting factor there, but you can do that. So be ambitious. Don't be shy, and have a great idea. I think those are the points.
And just on that point, I see one of our attendees saying that it is important to make sure that all parties are safe going in. It's very important that Enterprise Ireland engages with any funding as part of the collaboration, and linking in with KTI, Knowledge Transfer Ireland, our host this morning, helps people understand the nature of consortium agreements. An important point there. From your perspective, Gerard, both from an Enterprise Ireland hat and from the Disruptive Technology Innovation Fund, the do's and don'ts?
I think that there's, and it actually comes back to the earlier question around how do SMEs protect themselves within these consortia. One of the things that we would advocate, and I think this is important for all consortia, DTIF or EU or anything else, you need to have balance in your consortium. You need to have a balance of power. If you've got 3 large players and 1 very small player who's consuming 3% of the funding, then the opportunity for something to go wrong because of that power imbalance is much greater. Yeah. So I'd certainly argue that if you've got 4 participants, they should hold 25% or thereabouts of the funding. Let's not get religious about the numbers. Similarly, you just divide down the percentage as you go up in numbers. So I think the other thing that's important there is, and Duncan didn't quite mention this, we see a lot of consortium agreements that have predefined IP that people are bringing to the table. There's a declaration of that IP up front, and everybody knows who owns it. Okay. And that's very important, that people are bringing that stuff into the consortium and they're being clear about what they're bringing in and when they're bringing it in. As projects progress over a 2 to 3 year period, it's important to keep that updated, because some entities will say, we didn't think we were going to need this at the beginning, but we have a solution for this, and here is more IP, our background IP that we're bringing to bear on the project, and they declare that through whatever governance procedures exist. So that's how entities should be looking at protecting themselves. This ultimately is a commercial relationship, and it needs to be handled in that way.
And just before I come to Duncan on a number of those points, Gerard, from a funder's point of view, whether it be a national fund in Ireland or European funding, broadly speaking, do you think the funders do take into account the structure of the consortium and the power balances within that consortium before they would actually release the funds?
We certainly look at it, and you know, it's not something that, you know, we have particular numbers around things that we have to see. But it also, whenever it comes to evaluation of proposals, if there is a clear imbalance, evaluators pick up on this. So I would argue that they should be balanced where possible. I mean, it's not possible in all cases, but they certainly, where possible, there needs to be balance.
And I'm sure you, as a funder, and other funders as well, particularly the EU, I assume, have all sorts of staged evaluation processes through the life of a consortium.
Not really through the life of the consortium. Once, you know, just once we get to that evaluation stage, and we decide whether we wish to fund the proposal or not, that's the point that, you know, that consortium gets evaluated. We don't make changes in the middle of projects. It's not appropriate to do so.
Okay. Duncan, from your perspective, do's and don'ts?
I'd say start with the problem. I mean, Daniela said to start, make sure you've got a great idea. Better yet, start with a really important problem, because often the technology exists already, but it hasn't been matched to the problem statement. The problem environment is changing all the time as enabling technologies pop up and as societies evolve. You've got to make sure that you're solving a real problem that people really need fixed in a hurry. And if you do that, then the rest of it will write itself, because it becomes obvious that you need this technology and this expertise and this software and these regulatory advisors, and that's your consortium writing itself quite quickly. So absolutely, start from the thing you're trying to fix and then adapt accordingly. Likewise, pick the fund that you're going to use based on that challenge, because once you know what challenge you're solving and what your consortium is going to have to look like to deliver it, your list of potential funders has done that. And then you know you're in the right place at the right time.
And I presume business innovation centres like your own provide advice and perhaps contacts in terms of that journey into a consortium.
Yeah, I mean, a big chunk of what we do and what we're building out in Maynooth at the moment is the social infrastructure you need to make this work. Right, the universities are very good at hard infrastructure, bricks and mortar, and incubators provide space for companies to nucleate and bubble away. But the social infrastructure, that kind of the Brownian motion as you bounce off experts from 10 different disciplines and legal advisors and investors who are happy to sit down for a cup of coffee and tell you why your idea is stupid before you make a fool of yourself in public. All of that kind of network is really, really critical.
Yeah.
So,
I wish I had sort of support myself before I
I mean, the other thing is doing your homework, right? Because it's, you know, when I was an academic, there's an old saying that you know, 6 months of research can often save you an hour in the library, right? If you go away and do your homework first and make sure you understand, you know what the state of play is elsewhere, you can save yourself a lot of time and energy and embarrassment, because finding out that 6 other people are already working on perfectly viable technologies in the space can really, really be horrible at the end of a 5-month proposal writing process.
I'm keeping an eye on the time, but I've 2 more questions. Danielle, back to you. I know Inner Pharma is also engaged with the various technology centres around the country, which are links and bridges between the world of academic research and enterprise. Is that a good source of research consortium partners, have you found?
Oh, it's definitely extremely important in when you build your consortium, although you have to keep in mind that it really depends on what kind of a consortium you're building. So sometimes when you're building a consortium for a European project, for example, then you need to have players from different countries. You can't build your own consortium in Ireland, but definitely being part of these technological centers is crucial. There's so much you learn from expertise from the other partners, members of the technological centers. You are aligned with the same objectives and missions within these centers, so it's very easy. It just makes your life much easier. But on top of the technological centers, I also suggest to look at European partnerships. There are out there European partnerships, official European partnerships that you can join. as a university, as a SME, as a large enterprise, and then you are connected to even larger, larger number of people out there in Europe. You of course you choose the membership, sort of the partnership, depending on your goals and your strategy. But that's also another place to be, I think.
And very briefly, Daniela, where will people get that kind of information?
What are the partnerships there are on the European, so Horizon Europe website?
Okay.
There's some links to all the list. There are 11 European partnerships at the moment currently active. Things change in the sense that the new partnerships are formed. Technological centers, again, if you look, for example, an Enterprise Ireland website, you know which they are, and depending on your role, you can join them. Yeah, I think this is a very beneficial approach.
Gerard, I'll leave the last word with you, and I suppose it's a question from one of our audience, and it brings us back, I suppose, to the fundamentals here. It's a question: can you break down, I suppose, briefly, the economic development criteria in the evaluation stage?
They are published. They're available on the DTIF website. It's in the guide for applicants.
Okay, that's probably the quickest way of getting that information to you. The Destructive Technologies Innovation Fund website. I hope that answers that question. Folks, we're a little bit over time, but I found that a fascinating conversation, and thank you for your contribution to it. Gerard Land of Enterprise Ireland, Daniela Angione of Inner Pharma, and Duncan Casey of Maynooth University. Thank you all. Siobhan, back to you.
Thanks, Vincent, and thank you to all our panelists this morning. That was a really interesting discussion, and we've gotten quite a few questions this morning. If we haven't answered them during the webinar, we will put them to the panelists afterwards and try and get you an answer. And also, just to point out, the Knowledge Transfer Ireland website has a lot of resources that can help you in forming your research consortium, understanding the IP considerations from collaborative research. And also we have a funding tool on our website which can help you to identify different sources of Irish state funding for R&D and also European R&D funding. So it's worth taking a look on that. And just to mention that this KTI webinar series is really designed to shine a light on the interests of the Irish R&D community. So if there is a topic that you are interested in and you want us to cover, please do get in contact with us in KTI and we'd be happy to put together a webinar around that. So with that, we'll bring our webinar to a close this morning. Thank you again to all our panelists and to all of you for tuning in this morning.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.